The box was smoking. Thick, purple smoke. It smelled like burnt sugar and ozone. Hermione Granger did not move. She stood behind her desk. Her hands were flat on the polished wood. Her heart hammered against her ribs, loud enough to echo in the sudden silence of her office. It was supposed to be a celebratory gift. A bottle of Ogden's finest from a prominent supporter of the werewolf-rights bill. The bill was up for a final vote in 3 days. The resistance had been brutal. Someone didn't want her to make it to the vote. The door to her office blew open. Wood splintered. The frame cracked, spraying dust across the rug. Harry Potter stood in the doorway. His wand was drawn. His chest heaved as if he had run up 6 flights of stairs. He wasn't alone. The man stepping past him moved with quiet, terrifying precision. Black suit. Pale hair. Sharp jaw. Draco Malfoy. He didn't look at her. He locked his eyes on the box. "Back away, Granger," he said. His voice was completely flat. Cold. "Malfoy?" She breathed, frozen in place. "I said back away." She stepped back. She hit the bookshelf hard enough to rattle the glass. Draco raised his wand. He didn't shout a spell. He just slashed the air with a violent flick of his wrist. The box snapped shut. The smoke cut off instantly. Frost crawled over the cardboard. The box turned solid white. Then, it cracked. It split into 100 harmless pieces of ice, scattering across the carpet like broken glass. Silence dropped into the room. Hermione let out a shuddering breath. Her hands were shaking violently. She hid them in her pockets, refusing to let him see. "What?" she said. Her voice was too loud in the quiet room. "What is he doing here?" Harry lowered his wand. He rubbed his face. He looked utterly exhausted. "Saving your life," Harry said. "Again." "It was just a howler this morning," she argued, pointing at the ice. "This is..." "That was a blood-boiling curse," Draco said. He finally looked at her. His grey eyes were flat, empty of any warmth. "A specialized one," Draco went on, his tone conversational. "Tied to your magical signature. If you had untied the ribbon, your veins would have cooked you from the inside out in 10 seconds flat." Hermione felt sick. She gripped the edge of the bookshelf, trying to ground herself. "I have wards," she said, lifting her chin. "The Ministry has wards. Standard protocol prevents this kind of magic from entering the building." Draco scoffed. It was a harsh, ugly sound. "The Ministry wards are a joke," he said. "And this curse wasn't sent by a random angry citizen, Granger." He stepped closer to her desk. He nudged a piece of ice with his polished shoe. "This is old blood magic. Expensive. Rare. And someone brought it inside the building." She blinked at him. "Inside?" "It didn't come through the owlery," Harry said quietly. "Someone walked it to your door, Hermione." Her stomach dropped into a bottomless pit. Her colleagues. Her staff. The people she argued with in committee meetings every Tuesday. "The Auror office is taking over," Harry said, stepping fully into the room. "The threats have crossed the line into classified dark magic. My regular squad can't track this level of nuance. Malfoy can." He's a consultant, Hermione said, glaring at the blonde man. He works in the basement. He analyzes artifacts. He works for me, Harry said firmly. And as of right now, he works for you. Excuse me? Draco turned around. He crossed his arms over his chest. He looked thoroughly bored. I am your shadow, Granger, Draco said. Rand the clock protection. Until the vote is over and the traitor is caught. No. Yes, Harry said. I don't need a babysitter, she snapped, stepping away from the bookshelf. I need my security clearance updated and stronger wards. You need a curse breaker, Draco said, his voice dropping a register. Because you are apparently too stupid to recognize a trap when it's sitting on your desk. It looked like a gift. It smelled like ozone. A first year would know better. She glared at him. His gaze was steady, unblinking, unbothered. He wasn't the boy from school anymore. He was taller, broader, and so perfectly still it made her nervous. He carried an aura of dangerous competence that she had never seen before. I am not going into hiding, Hermione said, turning to Harry. You are going to a safe house, Harry said gently. Just until Friday. The vote is in 3 days. I have committee meetings. I have swing voters to sway. I have a press conference tomorrow morning. You can't vote if you're dead, Hermione. She looked at Harry. Harry wasn't backing down. She looked at Malfoy. Malfoy was checking his watch. We leave in 5 minutes, Draco said, checking his cufflinks. I have files to pack. Leave them. I need my notes for the hearing. Leave them. Malfoy, I am the Senior Undersecretary Granger. He took a step toward her. The room suddenly felt very small. I don't care about your title, he said softly. I don't care about your bill. I care about you breathing. And if you think I'm going to let you drag cursed parchment into a secure location, you are out of your mind. He was entirely too close. She could smell peppermint and something sharp. Like winter air. She tilted her chin up, refusing to retreat. I'm not leaving my work. Draco looked down at her. His jaw tightened. He reached past her. She flinched. He didn't touch her. He grabbed a blank notebook from the shelf and shoved it against her chest. Take this, he said. And a pen. Nothing else. Hermione took the notebook. Her fingers brushed his. His hands were freezing. He pulled back immediately, rolling his shoulders as if to shake off the contact. 5 minutes, he said, turning his back on her. The safe house was not a house. It was a flat. A tiny, cramped one-bedroom flat in the middle of Muggle London. Hermione stood in the center of the living room. It was dark. It smelled like dust and old paper. Draco walked past her without a word. He bypassed the lights, moving straight to the windows to pull the thick curtains shut. Raising his wand, he began muttering rapidly in Latin. Red light sparked from his wand tip. It hit the window frame and melted into the wood, sealing it tight. Wards. Heavy, dark wards that hummed against her skin. Hermione dropped her bag on the floor. It hit the wood with a loud thump. 1 bedroom, she said, looking down the short hallway. Observation. Draco said. He moved to the front door. He sealed it. 3 different locking charms, followed by a blood ward that flared gold before fading. Where am I supposed to sleep? She asked, dropping her coat onto a chair. The bed. And where are you sleeping? He turned around. He leaned back against the heavy wooden door. I don't sleep on a job, Granger. She crossed her arms, fixing him with a stubborn glare. You can't stay awake for 3 days straight. That's absurd. Watch me. He unbuttoned his suit jacket. He pulled it off and tossed it over the back of the sofa. He was wearing a black shirt. He meticulously unbuttoned the cuffs and rolled the sleeves up to his elbows. His forearms were lean and corded with muscle. The dark ink of the mark was completely covered by a thick, dark leather cuff on his left wrist. Hermione looked away, feeling like she was intruding on something private. She rubbed the back of her neck. This is ridiculous, she said, pacing the length of the small rug. This is necessary. My colleagues are not trying to kill me. Someone is. Draco walked into the small kitchen, his footsteps silent on the linoleum. He opened the cupboards. Empty. He pulled a shrunken paper bag from his trousers pocket. He placed it on the counter and tapped it with his wand. It grew into a large, overstuffed grocery bag. What is that? She asked, pausing her pacing. Food, he said plainly. Because I assume you haven't eaten today. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. She hadn't eaten. She couldn't remember her last meal. Coffee, maybe. Yesterday morning. He started pulling items out of the bag. A loaf of crusty bread. Sharp cheddar cheese. Green apples. Tin of Earl Grey tea. I can feed myself. She said defensively. Clearly. He kept unpacking. He flicked his wand at the stove. The kettle filled with water and began to boil instantly. Hermione walked into the kitchen. She stood on the opposite side of the narrow, scuffed counter. Why you? She asked, her voice quieter now. Draco paused. He was slicing the bread. The knife was perfectly steady in his long fingers. Because Potter asked. Harry has a dozen highly trained Aurors on his squad. And none of them know how to stop a localized blood curse without blowing up the entire floor. You blew up the room. There was ice everywhere. I froze it. There's a difference. He slid a plate across the scratched counter. Bread. Cheese. A perfectly sliced apple. She frowned at the plate, feeling an odd knot form in her throat. Eat. He commanded. I'm not hungry. Draco set the knife down. He placed both hands flat on the counter. He leaned forward, bringing his face level with hers. The cold mask was firmly back in place, shutting her out completely. Granger. You will eat. You will sit on that sofa. You will not touch the door. You will not touch the windows. You are not my boss. I am your guard dog. His voice was rough. It scraped against the quiet stillness of the flat, low and absolute. And I do not lose things I am hired to protect. He held her gaze without blinking. He wasn't backing down. He was taking this entirely too seriously. It wasn't a joke to him. It wasn't just another assignment or a favor for Potter. He was standing between her and the rest of the world, and he was determined not to let anything through. Hermione felt a strange, terrifying flutter in her chest. She ignored it, burying it under a layer of practiced irritation. She picked up a slice of apple. She took a stubborn bite. Draco watched her chew. His eyes tracked the movement of her throat when she swallowed, his expression unreadable. Then, he pushed away from the counter. He dragged a wooden chair over to the front door and sat down in front of it. Crossing his arms over his broad chest, he stretched his long legs out, crossing them at the ankles. He was physically blocking the only exit. Trapping her in. Trapping the danger out. Hermione stood in the kitchen. She picked up the mug of tea he had made for her. It warmed her freezing hands. She looked at him sitting in the shadows near the door. He was quiet. He was completely still, a sentinel in the dark. He was the most infuriating, arrogant man she knew. But as she took another bite of the apple, Hermione Granger realized something terrifying. For the first time all week, she felt completely, entirely safe. It was 2 a.m. The safe house was dead quiet. Hermione sat at the narrow kitchen counter. She was surrounded by stacks of parchment, 3 empty tea mugs, and a bottle of ink. Her back ached. Her eyes burned. She dipped her quill, ignoring the cramp in her hand. "You're writing garbage, Granger." The voice came from the shadows by the door. Hermione didn't look up. "I'm writing the committee briefing for the werewolf-rights bill. I can hear your quill dragging." Draco said, "Your strokes are too heavy. You're exhausted. Whatever you're writing is going to read like a troll wrote it." She gripped the quill tighter. "Go to sleep, Malfoy." "I don't sleep on duty. It's been 36 hours. She snapped, finally turning around. He was still in the chair. He hadn't moved. He was wearing the same black trousers, but he had swapped the button-down shirt for a dark grey sweater. He looked entirely too awake. "I have stamina," he said smoothly. "You have a death wish," she retorted. "You can't protect me if you collapse from exhaustion." Draco tilted his head. "Are you worried about me, Granger?" "I am worried about my security detail falling asleep standing up. I'm sitting down." She rubbed the back of her neck, letting out a frustrated breath. "You are impossible. And you are ruining perfectly good parchment." He replied, "Go to bed. I have to finish this. The vote isn't until Friday. And tomorrow is Wednesday. I have 48 hours to make sure the Conservative faction doesn't find a loophole in Clause 4. Draco stood up. He moved silently across the worn rug. He didn't stop until he was standing directly on the other side of the counter. He reached out and placed his hand flat over her parchment. His fingers were long. Pale. The silver ring on his index finger caught the dim kitchen light. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Stopping you from embarrassing yourself. Remove your hand, Malfoy." "No." She glared at him. "This is ministry business." "This is madness," he corrected, his voice dropping. "You are running on fumes. You look like a ghost. If you show up to that vote looking like this, they won't even read your bill. They'll just send you to St. Mungo's." Her chest tightened. She hated that he was right. She hated even more that he noticed. "I have to be perfect," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. If I'm not perfect, they'll use it as an excuse to throw the whole bill out. Draco didn't mock her. He didn't scoff. He just watched her. His grey eyes were unreadable in the low light. Slowly, he pulled the parchment out from under her hand. He folded it. He placed it out of her reach. "You are perfect, Granger," he said softly. "Now go to sleep." Hermione's breath hitched. She blinked at him, searching his face for the punchline. There wasn't one. He was completely serious. Before she could form a reply to that, a loud knock rattled the front door. 3 sharp raps. A pause. 2 more. Draco moved instantly. He shoved her behind him. His wand was in his hand before she even blinked. He stood between her and the door, his body a solid, immovable shield. "Identify," Draco barked, his voice cracking like a whip. "It's not," a muffled voice called from the hallway. "And if you hex me through the door again, Draco, I'm charging you for a new coat." Draco lowered his wand, though he didn't put it away. He flicked his wrist, dropping the 3 locking charms and the blood ward. The door swung open. Theo Knott stepped inside. He was wearing a ridiculously expensive emerald green coat and holding a massive stack of manila folders. "Charming place," Theo said, looking around the dusty flat. "Really screams luxury. I see why you volunteered for this, mate." Hermione stepped out from behind Draco. "Volunteered?" Draco shot Theo a lethal glare. "Shut up. Not. Do you have the trace results?" Theo grinned, entirely unbothered by the threat. "I do. And a good evening to you too, Granger. You look terrible." "Thank you," she muttered. Theo dropped the folders on the small dining table. He turned to look at Draco. He looked at the chair blocking the door. He looked at Draco's rolled-up sleeves. "You're hovering," Theo observed cheerfully. "I'm working," Draco snapped. "You hate guard duty," Theo said, leaning against the table. "You refused the minister's detail last month. Said you'd rather swallow glass than play bodyguard. Yet here you are, locking yourself in a muggle showbox." Draco's jaw clenched. "Potter assigned me." "Potter asked for volunteers," Theo corrected, his grin widening. "And you nearly broke your own neck getting to his office first." Hermione looked at Draco. Draco refused to look at her. His eyes bored a hole into Theo's head. "Give me the file, not before I throw you out the window." Theo chuckled and tapped the top folder. "The curses are complex. Old magic. Nasty stuff. Whoever is sending them has access to the restricted archives in the Department of Mysteries." Hermione gasped. "An unspeakable?" "Or someone with their clearance," Draco said, finally looking away from Theo. His voice was all business again. Cold and efficient. "Who in your department has cross-clearance?" "Only 2 people," Hermione said, her mind racing. "The department head. And my deputy, Cormac." Draco's lip curled into a sneer. "McLagan. Of course it's that idiot." "Cormac wouldn't try to kill me," she said defensively. "He's lazy, not murderous." "Lazy people hire assassins all the time," Theo pointed out gently. Draco picked up the folder. "I'll trace the magical signature against McLagan's known casting patterns." "Not," Go to the archives. Pull the access logs for the last 3 weeks. Theo saluted lazily. Right away, boss. Anything else? Need me to bring you a cot? A pillow? Some breath mints? Get out. Theo winked at Hermione and slipped out the door. Draco locked it instantly. The heavy wards slammed back into place. The flat was quiet again. Hermione stood by the counter, watching him. He didn't hate guard duty because it was beneath him. He hated it because he didn't care about the people he was guarding. But he had volunteered for her. You didn't have to take this assignment, she said quietly. Draco didn't look up from the file. I'm the best curse breaker they have. That's not an answer. He flipped a page. It's the only answer you're getting, Granger. Go to sleep. It was 2 a.m. again. The next night, Hermione was losing the fight. She was sitting on the lumpy sofa in the living room. Her notes were scattered across the coffee table. The dim lamp cast long shadows against the peeling wallpaper. She was trying to review the trace results Draco had pulled, but the words were blurring together. Her eyelids felt like they were made of lead. Draco was at the kitchen table. He was cross-referencing runic arrays. He hadn't stopped working since Theo left yesterday. He was a machine. A terrifying, unstoppable machine. Hermione's head drooped. She jerked it up, blinking hard. Read section 4 again. She mumbled to herself, picking up her quill. She wrote half a sentence before the quill slipped from her fingers. It rolled across the parchment, leaving a thick trail of black ink. She didn't notice. She was already asleep. Her head rested awkwardly against the back of the sofa. Her breathing slowed, evening out into a soft, steady rhythm. Across the room, Draco stopped writing. He listened to the sound of her breathing. He waited 2 full minutes to make sure she was actually under. Then, he stood up. He moved silently across the room. He stopped next to the sofa. She looked exhausted. There were dark circles under her eyes. The ink on her fingers was smeared across her knuckles. She was stubborn. She was infuriating. She was the most brilliant person he had ever met. He looked at the quill, still leaking ink onto her precious notes. Very carefully, he reached out and took the quill. He set it on the table. He moved the ruined parchment out of the way. She shivered in her sleep, curling slightly inward. The flat was drafty, the muggle heating utterly useless. Draco pulled his wand. He didn't cast a warming charm. Warming charms faded. Instead, he walked into the bedroom. He stripped the heavy, woolen blanket off the bed. He brought it back to the living room. He unfolded it. He draped it carefully over her shoulders, tucking the edges in so the draft wouldn't catch her. Hermione shifted. She turned her head, burying her face into the wool. She let out a soft, contented sigh. Draco froze. His hand was still resting on the back of the sofa, inches from her hair. He held perfectly still, fighting the overwhelming urge to brush a stray curl out of her face. Forcing his hand to close into a tight fist, he pulled away from the sofa and retreated to his hard wooden chair by the front door. Sitting down, he crossed his arms over his chest. He ignored the files on the table. Watching her sleep in the dark, he finally accepted the fact that he was completely, hopelessly lost. The access logs were 50 pages long, printed in agonizingly small font. Hermione sat on the uncomfortable, lumpy sofa. She had a stack of parchment balanced precariously on her lap. Draco sat next to her. He was entirely too close. The safehouse sofa had clearly been designed for one person, or perhaps two very small, very affectionate children. For a tall, broad-shouldered man and a woman surrounded by sprawling files, it was a physical impossibility not to touch. Their knees brushed every time he shifted. His arm pressed against hers whenever he turned a page. He radiated a steady, distracting heat. Hermione tried to focus on the names blurring together on the page. She was exhausted. Her eyes burned, and the coffee he had forced her to drink an hour ago was already losing its effect. "You're not reading," Draco said, not looking up from his own stack. "I'm reading," she argued. "You've been looking at the same line for 4 minutes. If you were actually reading, you would have noticed that the head of magical transportation accessed the vault 3 times yesterday." Hermione blinked, looking down. "He did?" "No," Draco replied smoothly, turning a page. "But I just proved you weren't reading." She glared at his sharp profile. "You are infuriating." "I'm thorough," he corrected. Page 24. His voice was a low rumble right next to her ear. It sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. Hermione forced herself to look at the parchment in his hand. She leaned closer, pointing at the 3rd line down. "Cormac McLagan," she read, her stomach tightening into a painful knot. "Time of entry, 3 in the morning." On the same night the blood-boiling curse was logged out of the vault, Draco finished. He leaned back against the sofa cushions. His thigh pressed firmly against hers. He didn't pull away, and to her immense frustration, neither did she. "It doesn't make sense," Hermione argued, rubbing her temples. "Cormac is an absolute idiot. He barely passed his NEWTS in charms. He doesn't have the magical theory or the focus required to tie a blood curse to my specific magical signature. He didn't cast it," Draco said. "He bought it." "Bought it?" "There's a black market for old blood magic, Granger. Highly illegal. Extremely expensive. It caters to people who have grudges but lack the talent to act on them. And you know this because—" Draco turned his head. He looked at her. He was so close she could count the individual silver flecks in his grey eyes. The scent of him peppermint and crisp winter air was everywhere. "Because my father used to run a large portion of it," he said flatly. Hermione stopped breathing for a second. She searched his face. He didn't look ashamed. He didn't look proud. He just looked impossibly tired, like a man carrying a weight he couldn't put down. "Cormac has money," Draco continued, turning his attention back to the file as if he hadn't just confessed a family secret. "His family is old. They have connections. He bought the curse, used his clearance to steal the base artifact from the Ministry archives, and tied it to you." "Why?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly. "I've worked with him for 3 years. I promoted him. Because if you die before Friday, the werewolf-rights bill fails," Draco said, his voice entirely devoid of pity. "And the deputy undersecretary gets promoted to your job. It's a clean, efficient power grab." Hermione let her head fall back against the backrest of the sofa. She looked up at the cracked, water-stained ceiling. Her own deputy. The man who brought her coffee on Tuesdays, the man who had signed her birthday card last month. He was actively, calculatingly trying to murder her for a title. "I'm going to be sick," she whispered. Draco shifted next to her. The warmth of his arm disappeared. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. "You aren't going to be sick," he said firmly. "You are going to finish your committee notes. You are going to memorize these logs. And then you are going to go into that hearing on Friday, and you are going to absolutely ruin his life." Hermione looked at his broad back. The dark grey sweater stretched tight across his shoulders. She felt a sudden, ridiculous urge to lean forward and rest her forehead against his spine. She wanted to let him carry the weight, just for 10 seconds. She gripped the edges of her file instead, grounding herself. "We need proof," she said, her voice steadier now. "A log entry isn't enough to convict him of attempted murder. We need the transaction record from the black market." "I can get it," Draco said, sitting up. "I know the brokers." "I can." Before he could finish the sentence, the fireplace roared to life. Green flames erupted in the small, cramped hearth, casting frantic, emerald shadows across the room. Draco was on his feet in less than a second. He didn't draw his wand. He already had it in his hand. He never put it away. He stepped directly in front of her, entirely blocking her from the fireplace. A small, folded paper airplane shot out of the green flames. It was a standard Ministry interdepartmental memo. It flew straight toward them, fluttering harmlessly in the air, glowing with the pale violet seal of the Auror office. Hermione stood up behind him, peering over his shoulder. "It's just a memo from Harry. He said he'd send an update on the perimeter. Potter knows better than to send unsecured mail to a safehouse." Draco snapped. He raised his wand. The memo crossed the center of the room. It hit the invisible edge of Draco's internal wards, the secondary net he had cast the moment they arrived. It didn't bounce off. It exploded. Black fire erupted in mid-air. A wave of blistering heat hit them like a physical blow. Draco shouted a shield charm, slashing his wand downward in a brutal arc. A thick dome of blue light slammed into place between them and the fire. The black flames hit the shield and hissed, eating away at the magic-like acid. Sparks shattered off the dome. Sharp, burning pieces of magical backlash shot through the room, embedding themselves in the walls and the floorboards. Draco caught the brunt of it on his forearms, grunting as the sparks bit into his sleeves, singeing the wool of his sweater. Hermione ducked, throwing her arms over her head, but a stray spark whipped past Draco's shoulder and grazed her cheek. It burned like a hot wire. She gasped, stumbling backward and clapping a hand over her face. The black fire died as quickly as it had appeared, leaving nothing but scorch marks on the ceiling and the heavy, choking smell of sulfur. The flat was suddenly, terrifyingly quiet. Draco dropped the shield. He spun around. His chest was heaving. His grey eyes were wild, completely stripped of their usual cold detachment. The mask was gone. "Are you hit?" he demanded, his voice rough and uneven. "I'm fine," she said quickly, trying to sound calm. She was pressing her hand to her cheek. It stung furiously, a sharp, throbbing pain that made her eyes water. Draco crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He didn't ask for permission. He grabbed her wrist and pulled her hand away from her face. His grip was incredibly tight. Hermione went entirely still. He leaned in, examining her cheek. He was breathing hard. She could feel the adrenaline heat radiating off him, completely consuming the small space between them. "It's just a graze," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "It's a ward burn," he corrected, his voice dropping to a harsh, ragged whisper. "If I had been half a second slower, that fire would have taken your head off. But you weren't." Draco's gaze locked onto the angry red line on her cheek. His jaw tightened. A muscle ticked wildly in his neck. He was furious. He was terrified. Slowly, his hand moved from her wrist. He didn't step back. He stepped closer. His fingers brushed her jaw. Hermione's breath caught in her throat. His touch was incredibly gentle. His fingers were freezing cold, a stark contrast to the burning heat of her cheek, but so careful it made her heart hammer desperately against her ribs. He traced the edge of the burn with his thumb. She looked up at him. He was looking at her mouth. The air in the room felt thick. Heavy. The smell of ozone and sulfur faded, replaced entirely by the sharp, clean scent of peppermint and winter air that always surrounded him. He leaned in. He was going to kiss her. She tilted her chin up, entirely abandoning logic, reason, and sanity. She wanted him too. She wanted to bridge the final inch between them and let the tension shatter. His thumb brushed her lower lip. Then, he stopped. He stopped short, his eyes snapping up to meet hers. Reality crashed over him like a bucket of ice water. He realized exactly what he was doing. He was her security detail. She was his assignment. He pulled his hand back as if he had been burned. He took a sharp, almost violent step backward, creating 3 feet of distance between them. Hermione swayed slightly, the sudden loss of his heat leaving her cold and empty. Draco turned away. He ran a shaking hand through his pale hair, destroying its perfect order. "I need to recast the wards," he said. His voice was completely flat again. The mask was back in place, thicker and colder than before, locking everything else away. "Malfoy." "Don't," he interrupted sharply. He walked over to the windows, keeping his back rigidly turned to her. "Sit on the sofa, Granger. Do your work. Don't move." He raised his wand and began muttering in Latin, his shoulders tense and unyielding. Hermione stood in the middle of the room. Her cheeks stung. Her lips tingled from the ghost of his touch. She watched his broad back, entirely unable to breathe. The smell of sulfur lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating. The flat was entirely silent except for the low, buzzing hum of Draco recasting the internal wards. Hermione knelt on the floor. Her hands were shaking. She tried to gather the papers that had been scattered by the explosion. Most of them were singed at the edges. One of her committee reports had a burn hole straight through the center. She picked it up. She looked at the charred parchment. Cormac had sent that memo. He had smiled at her in the elevator on Monday. He had asked about her cat. And then he had gone to the Department of Mysteries, stolen a restricted artifact, and tied a lethal curse to her magical signature. Her chest felt incredibly tight. She reached for the next page, but her fingers wouldn't close around it. They were trembling too violently. She squeezed her eyes shut. "Leave them." Draco's voice came from the window. It was quiet. It wasn't an order. Hermione didn't look up. "I need to organize them." The vote is on Friday. I have to leave them, Granger. She grabbed a handful of parchment. The edges crinkled loudly in the quiet room. I can't just leave them, she said, her voice rising, cracking at the edges. I have to fix this. I have to prove he did it. I have to rewrite the defense for Clause 4 because he was the one who drafted it, and now the entire section is suspect and I. Hermione. She stopped. He had never used her first name. Not once, in the entire 7 years they had been at school, or the 3 days they had been locked in this flat. She looked up. Draco was standing 5 feet away. He had dropped his wand on the dining table. His suit jacket was gone. His sleeves were still rolled up, revealing the angry red burn marks on his forearms where he had blocked the fire. He wasn't wearing the cold, detached mask anymore. He just looked at her. Stop, he said softly. Hermione looked down at the burned parchment in her hands. He bought me a coffee on Tuesday. She whispered. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. He bought me a coffee, Malfoy. He asked how my weekend was. And then he tried to burn my head off. Her breath hitched. The tightness in her chest expanded, crushing her lungs. She couldn't draw a full breath. The walls of the tiny muggle flat felt like they were closing in, pressing against her skin. I've worked so hard, she choked out. The tears spilled over, hot and humiliating, tracking down her face and stinging the wart burn on her cheek. I just wanted to pass the bill. I just wanted them to be safe. And they hate me for it. They hate me so much they want me dead. She dropped the parchment. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes, trying to stop the tears, trying to push the panic back down. She was Hermione Granger. She didn't break down on the floor. She fought back. But she was so incredibly tired. A shadow fell over her. Draco didn't hesitate. He didn't ask for permission. He dropped to his knees right in front of her. He reached out and grabbed her wrists. He pulled her hands away from her face with careful, deliberate force. Look at me, he commanded. She shook her head, squeezing her eyes shut. I can't. Look at me. She opened her eyes. He was right there. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating off his skin. His grey eyes were entirely focused on hers. Fierce. Unyielding. They don't hate you. Draco said, his voice a low, rough rasp that vibrated in the small space between them. They are terrified of you. Because you're changing the world, and they're small, insignificant cowards. Hermione let out a broken sob, the sound tearing out of her throat. I can't fight them all, Draco. I can't. You don't have to, he said fiercely. Not right now. Draco let go of her wrists. He shifted his weight, closing the remaining inches between them, and pulled her firmly into his chest. Hermione completely shattered. She didn't fight him. She didn't push him away. She collapsed against him, burying her face in the dark wool of his sweater. Her hands came up, gripping the fabric of his shirt like a lifeline. She cried, the deep, exhausted, ugly kind of crying she hadn't let herself to since the war ended. Draco didn't flinch. He didn't stiffen. He wrapped both arms around her, pulling her completely into his lap. He held her with a desperate, crushing grip. One of his large hands settled flat between her shoulder blades, holding her against his chest. His other hand moved up, his long fingers burying themselves in her chaotic curls, cradling the back of her head. "I've got you," he murmured. His voice was pressed directly against her ear. It was a promise. An absolute, unbreakable vow. "I've got you," he repeated, his thumb stroking a slow, rhythmic circle against a scalp. "I'm right here." Hermione clung to him. She could hear his heartbeat underneath the wool. It was fast and hard, matching the frantic rhythm of her own. He smelled like ozone, sulfur, and peppermint. He smelled like safety. She cried until her throat was raw, pouring out the fear of the last 3 days, the bone-deep exhaustion of the last 3 years, and the crushing betrayal of her own department. She cried for the people she couldn't save, and for the fact that she had to be saved herself. And through it all, Draco Malfoy just held her. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't tell her it would be fine. He didn't tell her to stop. He just anchored her to the floor, refusing to let her carry the weight alone for 1 more second. Slowly, the panic began to recede. Her breathing leveled out. The tears stopped, leaving her feeling hollowed out and impossibly light. She didn't pull away. She stayed exactly where she was, her cheek resting against his chest. His arms were still wrapped tightly around her, holding her flush against him. The flat was quiet again. Draco shifted slightly. He rested his chin on the top of her head. "Better?" he asked softly. Hermione nodded against his sweater. "Good." He didn't let her go. She closed her eyes, entirely surrounded by his heat. The cold, professional distance between them had completely burned away, leaving something entirely new in its place. Something fiercely protective. Something undeniable. He shifted one of his hands, moving it from her hair down to her cheek. His thumb carefully avoided the angry red wart burn, brushing gently against her jawline instead. Hermione turned her head slightly, pressing a soft, unconscious kiss into the palm of his hand. Draco's breath caught sharply in his chest. His hand tightened on her waist. "Hermione." He breathed. It sounded like a confession. Like a man surrendering a war he had been fighting for years. She looked up at him. The mask was entirely gone. His eyes were dark, tracking the movement of her lips. He lowered his head. His forehead rested against hers. "I am not going to let them touch you," he whispered fiercely, his lips a fraction of an inch from hers. "Do you understand me? I will burn the entire ministry to the ground before I let anyone hurt you." Hermione looked into his eyes. She saw the absolute, terrifying truth in them. He meant every single word. "I know," she whispered back. He closed the distance. He pressed his lips to her forehead. A slow, lingering kiss that sent a wave of heat straight to her chest. Then he moved down, pressing another kiss to her uninjured cheek. He lingered there, his breath warm against her skin. He didn't kiss her mouth. He held back, the last shred of his professional duty fighting a losing battle against his instincts. But he didn't pull away, either. He just stayed there, on the floor of the dusty safehouse, holding her together. For the first time in her life, Hermione Granger stopped trying to fight the battle alone, and simply let herself be held. The ministry atrium was dark. It was 3 in the morning on Friday. The vote was in 7 hours. Hermione stood behind a marble pillar. Her heart was beating so fast she felt sick. Draco stood right behind her. He didn't touch her, but she could feel the heat of him. He was a solid, unmoving presence at her back. "Steady, Granger," he whispered. "I'm steady," she whispered back. "Your hands are shaking. They're vibrating with rage, Malfoy." A low, dry huff of breath ruffled her hair. "Good." Across the atrium, the elevator doors chimed softly. The gilded grills slid open. Cormac McLaggen stepped out. Wearing a tailored cloak and carrying a heavy leather briefcase, he looked perfectly composed. He walked toward the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures with the arrogant stride of a man who thought he had already won, completely unaware that Harry Potter and 6 Aurors were waiting inside. Cormac raised his wand to bypass the security seal on Hermione's door. The door didn't open. It exploded in a flash of blinding red light, stunning spells erupting from the office. "Aurors!" Harry's voice boomed across the empty atrium. "Drop your wand, McLaggen." Cormac didn't drop his wand. He panicked. Dropping the briefcase, he spun around and raised his wand wildly. Instead of aiming at the Aurors pouring out of the office, he spotted Hermione stepping out from behind the pillar and took aim at her. "Sectum Semper!" Cormac screamed. Hermione didn't even have time to raise her wand. The curse was too fast. The dark magic cut through the air, screaming like tearing metal. Draco moved faster. Without time to cast a shield, Draco lunged forward, throwing his entire body in front of her to take the curse point blank in the chest. The impact threw him backward. He crashed into Hermione, taking them both to the marble floor in a tangle of limbs. Red light filled the atrium as Harry and the Aurors fired simultaneously. Cormac hit the floor, completely unconscious, bound in thick magical ropes. Hermione didn't look at Cormac. She was looking at the blood rapidly soaking through Draco's black sweater. "Draco!" She screamed. He was lying half on top of her. He gasped, his eyes wide, his hands clutching his chest. "I'm fine," he ground out, coughing. Blood flecked his pale lips. "I'm fine." "You're bleeding." "It's a slashing hex," he muttered, forcing himself up on one elbow. He looked down at his chest. Sloppy casting. Didn't go deep. Harry sprinted across the atrium, dropping to his knees beside them. "Malfoy, hold still. We need a healer." "I don't need a healer, Potter." Draco snapped, his voice sharp despite the pain. "I need to get her out of here. Is the area secure?" He was acting alone. Harry said quickly, "We have the buyer logs." "His done." Draco nodded once, tightly. He pushed himself up, refusing Harry's offered hand. He swayed slightly, leaning heavily on the marble pillar, but his wand was perfectly steady in his right hand. "Let's go, Granger," he said. "You need St. Mungo's," Hermione protested, getting to her feet. Her hands were shaking violently now. "I need my kit at the safehouse." He corrected. He grabbed her wrist. His grip was entirely too tight. "Apparatus." The safehouse felt different. The heavy, oppressive tension of the last 3 days was gone, replaced by a frantic, buzzing panic. They materialized in the center of the small living room. Draco stumbled instantly. He caught himself against the back of the sofa, letting go of her wrist. He groaned, pressing his free hand against the massive, bleeding slash across his chest. Hermione didn't hesitate. She grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the bedroom. "Sit on the bed. Take the sweater off." "I can do it," he argued, his teeth gritted. "Sit down, Draco." It was the first time she had used his first name. Draco froze. He looked at her, his grey eyes blown wide with pain and something else she couldn't name. Then, he sat down on the edge of the mattress. He pulled the ruined sweater over his head, wincing as the fabric pulled against the wound. He tossed it onto the floor. Hermione dropped to her knees in front of him. The cut was long and ugly, stretching diagonally from his collarbone to his ribs. It was bleeding heavily, sluggish and dark. "Where is your kit?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady. "Bathroom counter. Black bag." She ran to the bathroom, grabbing the leather bag, and sprinted back. She tore it open, pulling out bandages and a small vial of essence of dittany. "This is going to burn." She warned him. "Just do it." She poured 3 drops of dittany directly onto the deepest part of the cut. Draco let out a harsh, suffocated hiss. His hands gripped the edges of the mattress so hard his knuckles turned white. The muscles in his stomach jumped, rigid and corded with tension. Green smoke rose from the wound as the skin began to knit together. Hermione worked quickly, cleaning away the blood and wrapping a thick white bandage around his chest to protect the tender, newly healed skin. She had to lean incredibly close to do it. She had to wrap her arms completely around his torso to pull the bandage tight. Her cheek brushed against his bare shoulder. She could feel his heart hammering against her chest. The physical proximity was overwhelming. The air in the tiny bedroom felt thick, charged with the same electric heat that had sparked between them the night before. Finishing the knot, she didn't pull away. She stayed kneeling between his knees, her hands resting lightly against his ribs as she looked up at him. Draco was looking down at her. He wasn't wearing the mask. He looked completely, devastatingly vulnerable. "You took a curse for me," she whispered. "It was my job," he said. His voice was hoarse. "That wasn't your job. I couldn't let him hit you." He raised his hand. He reached out, his fingers trembling slightly, and brushed a stray curl away from her face. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, incredibly soft, incredibly careful. Hermione leaned into his touch. She closed her eyes. "You're safe now," he murmured. "We're safe," she corrected softly. Draco's hand stopped moving. He stared at her for a long, agonizing second. Then, he pulled his hand back. He didn't just pull his hand away. He completely withdrew. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced instantly by walls of ice and iron. He stood up, forcing her to step back. "The assignment is over," Draco said. His voice was clipped. "Professional." "Empty." Hermione blinked, completely thrown off balance. "What?" "McLaggen is in custody," Draco said, turning his back to her. He walked over to the chair in the living room and grabbed his suit jacket. "The threat is neutralized. You don't need a security detail anymore." "Draco, wait. Don't call me that." He turned around. The cold, ruthless mask was firmly back in place. He looked exactly like the man who had kicked her door open 3 days ago. "I am a dark magic consultant, Granger. I was hired to keep you breathing." "I did." "You just took a curse for me," she argued, her voice rising in panic. You held me on the floor yesterday and told me you'd burn the ministry down. I crossed a line, he snapped. The words hit her like a physical blow. He pulled his jacket on, wincing slightly as the fabric pulled across his chest. I lost objectivity, Draco said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. I let the forced proximity compromise my judgment. It won't happen again. You're lying, she said fiercely. I am resigning the detail, he said, completely ignoring her. He walked into the bedroom. He grabbed his small duffel bag from the floor. Hermione followed him, her heart breaking in real time. You're running away, she accused him. Because you're terrified. Draco didn't answer. He shoved his ruined sweater into the bag and zipped it shut. He walked past her, giving her a wide berth, treating her like a stranger. He went to the front door and dropped the heavy wards with a single flick of his wand. Potter will have a regular Auror meet you here in the morning to escort you to the vote, Draco said. He put his hand on the doorknob. He didn't look at her. He fixed his eyes straight ahead on the cheap wooden door. Goodbye, Granger. He walked out, pulling the door shut behind him. The click of the lock echoed loudly in the quiet flat. Hermione stood in the middle of the living room, entirely alone, feeling colder than she had ever felt in her life. The gavel fell with a loud, resounding crack. The motion passes, the chief warlock announced, his voice echoing through the vast stone chamber. Clause 4 remains intact. The werewolf-rights bill is ratified. Half the room erupted into cheers. Hermione sat at the center table. She didn't cheer. She didn't smile. She let out a long, shuddering breath, resting her forehead against her hands. It was over. 3 years of drafting, fighting, and negotiating. 3 days of terror in a tiny muggle flat. The betrayal. The dark fire. It was all over. Harry Potter pushed his way through the crowd of celebrating lawmakers. He reached the table and dropped a heavy hand onto her shoulder. You did it, Hermione, Harry said, grinning. It's lore. We did it, she corrected quietly, standing up. Where is he? Harry's smile faltered. He didn't need to ask who she meant. He's in his office, Harry said, his voice dropping. He submitted his final report an hour ago. He requested an immediate transfer to the Paris bureau. He's leaving tonight. Hermione's stomach plummeted. Tonight? He said his work here was finished, Harry said carefully, watching her face. He said you didn't need a detail anymore. Hermione grabbed her leather satchel from the table. Ignoring the committee members trying to shake her hand and the reporters waiting outside the chamber doors, she walked straight to the elevators and hit the button for level 2 with entirely too much force. The Auror department was chaotic, full of people celebrating the end of the week. Hermione ignored all of them. She marched down the long, grey corridor, her heels clicking sharply against the stone floor. She reached the heavy oak door at the very end of the hall. A small brass plaque read, D. Malfoy, Dark Magic Consultant. The door was cracked open. Hermione pushed it the rest of the way. Draco was standing behind his desk. He was wearing a fresh black suit, perfectly tailored, completely immaculate. The heavy bandage underneath his shirt wasn't visible at all. He was levitating a stack of old files into a leather trunk. He didn't look up when she walked in. I'm busy, Potter, Draco said coldly. I'm not Potter. Draco froze. The files dropped out of the air, landing in the trunk with a loud thud. He slowly turned around. The mask was perfectly in place. His face was a blank, unreadable wall of ice. His grey eyes were entirely empty. "Granger," he said. His voice was smooth and hollow. "Congratulations on the vote. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a portkey to catch." He reached for the lid of the trunk. Hermione didn't hesitate. She drew her wand and slashed it through the air. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind her. The lock clicked loudly. A bright red ward flared across the wood, sealing the room. Draco stopped. He looked at the door. He looked back at her. "Drop the ward, Granger." "No. I am an official ministry consultant on active duty. You are interfering with my deployment. I don't care." Hermione dropped her satchel onto the floor. She put her wand in her pocket. She walked across the room, closing the distance between them until she was standing directly in front of his desk. "You're running away," she said. "I am taking a promotion," he corrected smoothly. "You are a coward." A muscle ticked in his jaw. The ice cracked, just for a second, revealing a flash of raw, unfiltered anger. "I did my job," Draco said, his voice dropping, completely losing its polite tone. "I kept you alive. You won your vote. You have your shiny new lore. We are done. You took a curse for me," she shouted, hitting the top of his desk with the flat of her hand. Draco didn't flinch. "I would have taken it for anyone. It's the job. You're lying." "I'm not. You held me on the floor for an hour," she argued, her voice breaking slightly. "You promised me you would burn the ministry down. You kissed my face." Draco stepped back, putting another foot of distance between them. "I told you," he said, his voice ragged. "I lost objectivity. I made a mistake." "It wasn't a mistake. It was a mistake," he roared, suddenly slamming his own hands onto the desk. The sound echoed violently in the small office. Hermione didn't jump. She didn't back down. Draco locked his eyes on her, his chest heaving. The mask was completely gone now. He looked exactly the way he had looked in the safehouse, terrified and utterly desperate. "You don't understand," he breathed, gripping the edge of the desk so hard the wood groaned. "You are completely reckless. You don't sleep. You don't eat. You walk directly into the line of fire for people who hate you. I have to. I can't watch it," he interrupted, his voice cracking. "I can't stand next to you and watch you destroy yourself. Every time you walk out of a secure room, my chest physically hurts. When McLagan raised his wand, I thought my heart stopped." He let go of the desk. He took a staggering step backward, running a hand through his hair, ruining its perfect order. "I'm compromised, Hermione," he whispered, his gaze fixed on the floor. "I can't protect you if I can't think clearly. And when I'm around you, I can't think at all." Hermione's breath caught in her throat. She looked at him. He wasn't running because he didn't care. He was running because he cared too much. He was terrified of failing her. She walked around the desk. Draco looked up, taking another step back until his shoulders hit the bookshelves behind him. He was trapped. "Stay back," he warned her, Hermione ignored him. She stepped directly into his space. "I don't need a bodyguard," she said quietly, looking up into his wide, frantic grey eyes. "I don't need you to stand outside my door and take curses for me." "Then what do you need?" he asked, his voice completely wrecked. "I need you." Draco stopped breathing. "Don't say that," he whispered, closing his eyes. "Please, don't say that. I need you," she repeated, stepping closer. Her chest brushed against his. The familiar scent of ozone, sulfur, and peppermint surrounded her. She reached up. She placed both of her hands on his chest, right over the heavy bandage hiding the slash he had taken for her. "I need you to stay," she said. Draco opened his eyes. The fear was still there, but it was completely eclipsed by something else. Something dark, heavy, and absolutely overwhelming. He didn't step away. "If I stay," he warned, his voice a low, rough rumble that vibrated against her palms. "If I stay, I am never leaving. I am going to be entirely, completely yours. You understand that?" Hermione smiled. It was the first time she had smiled in for days. "I'm counting on it," she whispered. Draco groaned, a desperate, entirely surrendered sound. He dropped his hands to her waist. He gripped her hard, pulling her flush against his chest, completely ignoring the wound on his ribs. He lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It wasn't polite. It was 3 days of absolute terror and forced restraint shattering all at once. Hermione gasped against his mouth. He took advantage instantly. His tongue swept across her lower lip, tasting like mint and dark, desperate heat. She tangled her hands in his pale hair, pulling him closer. He tasted exactly the way he smelled: sharp, clean, and completely intoxicating. He backed her up, spinning them around until her back hit the heavy oak desk. He pressed his body completely against hers, caging her in. His kiss slowed, turning deep and agonizingly sweet. He traced the line of her jaw, his thumb brushing over the fading red wart burn on her cheek. He kissed the corner of her mouth. He kissed her cheek. He buried his face in her neck, breathing her in like oxygen. "Mine," he murmured against her skin. "Yours," she promised, her hands clinging to his broad shoulders. The ministry was still chaotic outside the door. The reporters were still waiting. The threats were probably not entirely gone. But as Draco Malfoy held her against the desk, entirely surrounding her with his heat and his completely unyielding protection, Hermione knew none of that mattered. The silence was finally broken, and she was exactly where she belonged.